A cold night and a shocking revelation. On a bitterly cold winter night, the streets of the city were alive with the quiet rustle of leaves and the faint hum of passing cars. Amidst the chaos of life, a boy named Ethan huddled against the corner of an alley. His thin jacket did little to shield him from the icy wind, but he clung to it as if it were a treasure. Ethan, no older than 12, had been homeless for as long as he could remember. Life on the streets had taught him resilience, and more importantly, how to go unnoticed. Ethan's days were spent scavenging for food, dodging trouble, and seeking warmth wherever he could find it. Despite his circumstances, he held on to an unshakable sense of justice. It was as though life's harshness had sharpened his ability to discern right from wrong. That night, seeking refuge from the biting cold, Ethan wandered into the parking lot of an upscale supermarket. He crouched behind a large SUV, hoping to stay out of sight until morning. As Ethan settled in, voices cut through the quiet. Curious and cautious, he peeked around the bumper of the car. A man and a woman stood nearby, their faces partially obscured by the dim light of a distant street lamp. They were speaking in hushed tones, but their words carried a weight that made Ethan's heart race. "It's all set for tomorrow," the woman said, her voice icy and deliberate. She wore a luxurious coat and a pearl necklace that sparkled even in the faint light. The man, younger and less refined, nodded. "Good. He'll take the car at dawn. By noon, it'll be over, and we'll be free to enjoy what's ours." Ethan strained to hear more. His young mind pieced together the fragments of their conversation. They were planning something, a terrible betrayal against someone named Daniel. "He trusts us both," the woman continued, her tone cold and calculating. "He won't suspect a thing until it's too late." The man smirked. "And once it's done, we're set for life. No more of his self-righteous lectures or him looking down on us." Ethan's stomach churned. Whoever Daniel was, he was in grave danger. The weight of the woman's words, so devoid of empathy, sent shivers down his spine. The pair shared a glance before parting ways. The woman got into a sleek black sedan, while the man disappeared on foot into the shadows. Ethan remained frozen in place, torn between fear and a growing determination. He knew he couldn't let this happen, but what could a boy like him do against people like them? As the woman's car disappeared into the night, Ethan whispered to himself, "I have to find this Daniel. He needs to know. A mansion beyond reach." The next morning, Ethan followed his instincts. He recalled the woman's car and the direction she had driven. He wandered through the city until he found himself in an affluent neighborhood, a stark contrast to the cold streets he called home. Towering mansions lined the streets, their gates tall and foreboding. One mansion, in particular, caught his eye. It was grander than the others, with high walls and an ornate gate. A sleek black sedan, the one he'd seen the woman driving, was parked inside. "This must be it," Ethan muttered, his breath visible in the cold air. Ethan waited outside the gates, unsure how to approach. He had no plan, just a gnawing sense of urgency. Hours passed before a car pulled up to the gate from the driveway. The vehicle's windows were tinted, but Ethan could see the silhouette of a man in the driver's seat. This had to be Daniel. Summoning every ounce of courage, Ethan ran to the car, waving his arms frantically. The car stopped abruptly, and the window rolled down to reveal a man in his late 40s. His sharp suit and polished demeanor exuded wealth and authority. "What on earth are you doing?" the man demanded, his tone stern but not unkind. "Please, sir," Ethan said, his voice shaking. "You're in danger. I overheard something last night, something terrible." The man frowned. "Danger? What are you talking about?" Ethan took a deep breath and explained what he had heard, recounting the woman and the man's conversation in the parking lot. He described the plan to sabotage the car's brakes and the malice in their voices. At first, Daniel's expression was skeptical, but as Ethan spoke, the boy's sincerity was undeniable. Daniel leaned back in his seat, processing the gravity of the revelation. "If what you're saying is true," Daniel began, his voice steady but laced with tension. "Then I owe you my life. Stay here." A shocking discovery. Daniel exited the car and called for his personal mechanic, instructing him to inspect the brakes immediately. Ethan watched nervously as the mechanic worked, his small frame trembling in the cold. After a tense silence, the mechanic emerged, his face pale. "The brakes have been tampered with, sir. If you had driven this car, it wouldn't have stopped." Daniel's expression darkened. Betrayal and anger flickered across his face. He turned to Ethan, who stood silently, clutching his thin jacket. "You've done something incredible today, boy," Daniel said, his voice firm but kind. "You saved my life." Ethan's cheeks flushed with a mix of pride and relief. For the first time in his life, he felt seen, like his existence mattered. But Daniel's gratitude was overshadowed by the storm of emotions brewing within him. The revelation shattered his world. The woman he had loved, the brother he had trusted, they were plotting to end his life for money. As Daniel grappled with the betrayal, Ethan spoke up. "Sir, what will you do now?" Daniel's eyes hardened with resolve. "They think they've outsmarted me," he said, more to himself than to Ethan. "But they've underestimated us both." A new ally. Daniel invited Ethan into his home, an act of kindness that left the boy speechless. As the two sat in the warmth of the grand living room, Daniel began to craft a plan. "They must believe their plan has succeeded," he said. "We'll give them just enough rope to hang themselves." Ethan nodded, his resolve matching Daniel's. Though their worlds couldn't have been more different, they were united by a shared purpose: to expose the truth and ensure justice was served. The alliance between the homeless boy and the millionaire was an unlikely one, but it was exactly what they needed to face the storm ahead. Together, they began to weave a counterplot, one that would turn the conspirators' scheme against them. As the sun set on that fateful day, Ethan felt a flicker of hope, a belief that for the first time, he could be part of something greater than himself. Little did he know, the events that would unfold would test his courage and change his life forever. Threads of betrayal. Ethan's presence in Daniel's grand mansion was surreal. The boy, accustomed to cold pavements and anonymity, now found himself in a world of warmth and luxury. Yet he couldn't shake the weight of what he had stumbled into. Daniel, calm but visibly shaken, paced the room with a phone in his hand, speaking in clipped tones to someone Ethan assumed was his lawyer. "Yes, confirm the changes to my will immediately," Daniel instructed. "Include the clause I mentioned. No benefits in the event of a suspicious death." When Daniel hung up, he turned to Ethan. "We have to act carefully. If Rachel and my brother sense we're onto them, they might accelerate their plan, or worse." Ethan nodded solemnly. "What do we do now?" Daniel sat down across from the boy, his piercing eyes scanning Ethan's face. "First, I need you to tell me everything you heard again. Leave nothing out." Ethan took a deep breath and began recounting the conversation in detail. The tone of Rachel's voice, the way Terry laughed, and the cold precision of their plan. Daniel listened intently, his jaw tightening with each word. He had loved Rachel deeply, trusted her completely, and had supported Terry through countless struggles. Now, the weight of their betrayal was like a dagger to the heart. The shadows of the past. Daniel's thoughts drifted back to the early days of his marriage. Rachel had been the epitome of grace and charm. She'd supported him during the difficult years of building his company, standing by his side at every event and sharing in his triumphs. Or so he thought. Terry, his younger brother, had always been the rebel. While Daniel worked tirelessly to build his empire, Terry had squandered opportunities, blaming the world for his failures. Despite their differences, Daniel had never turned his back on him. He'd offered Terry jobs, paid off his debts, and even allowed him access to his home. But now, everything Daniel believed about them was unraveling. The people he thought were closest to him were willing to sacrifice his life for wealth. It wasn't just betrayal. It was a desecration of the trust he had so freely given. A plan of deception. As the clock ticked toward midnight, Daniel's resolve hardened. He leaned forward, speaking in a low, deliberate tone. They believe I'm predictable, that I won't see this coming. That's their weakness. We're going to use it against them. Ethan listened carefully as Daniel outlined his plan. They would stage his death, creating the illusion that Rachel and Terry's plot had succeeded. It would be dangerous, but it was the only way to expose them without tipping them off. We'll need to make it convincing, Daniel said, pacing again. The car, the crash site, everything must look real. I'll have a trusted team handle the staging. What about me? Ethan asked. What can I do? Daniel stopped and looked at the boy, a small smile softening his stern features. You've already done more than most adults would, but if you're willing, I could use someone to keep an eye on them. You're invisible to them, a strength we can use. Ethan nodded, a mix of fear and determination in his eyes. I'll do whatever it takes. Rachel's deception. Meanwhile, in the mansion's lavish master bedroom, Rachel sat at her vanity, her reflection shimmering in the dim light. Her face, so composed and serene to the outside world, was now twisted in frustration. Terry's voice crackled through the speaker of her phone. You're sure he hasn't noticed anything? Terry asked, his tone laced with impatience. Rachel sighed, adjusting her pearl necklace. He's clueless, Terry. Daniel's always been too focused on his work to see what's right in front of him. And the car? Terry pressed. It's ready. By tomorrow, this will all be over. Rachel ended the call and stared at her reflection, a flicker of doubt crossing her face. For a brief moment, she questioned her decision. But greed and ambition quickly snuffed out any lingering guilt. She had sacrificed too much to back out now. Ethan's first assignment. Early the next morning, Ethan set off for his first mission. Daniel had instructed him to observe Rachel and Terry discreetly, noting their movements and any suspicious behavior. Dressed in a tattered hoodie, Ethan blended seamlessly into the city's bustling streets, a ghost among the crowd. He followed Rachel as she drove to meet Terry at a quiet cafe on the outskirts of the city. The two conspirators sat in a corner booth, their conversation masked by the hum of surrounding chatter. Ethan slipped into a seat nearby, straining to hear them. This is it, Rachel whispered, her voice low but filled with anticipation. By this time tomorrow, he'll be gone, and we'll have everything. Terry smirked. You mean you'll have everything? Don't forget our deal, Rachel. Rachel's eyes narrowed. Don't push me, Terry. I've risked just as much as you, if not more. Ethan clenched his fists under the table, anger bubbling inside him. These weren't just schemers. They were predators, circling their prey with cold, calculated precision. He slipped out of the cafe unnoticed, determined to report everything back to Daniel. The final preparations. That evening, Daniel's team began setting the stage for the fake accident. They selected a remote stretch of road surrounded by dense forest, ensuring privacy for their operation. The car, a similar model to Daniel's, was rigged with a controlled explosion device designed to destroy the vehicle completely without harming anyone inside. As Daniel supervised the preparations, Ethan stood by his side, his wide eyes taking in the flurry of activity. Do you think they'll believe it? He asked. They'll have no reason not to, Daniel replied. People like Rachel and Terry only see what they want to see. They'll be so blinded by their greed, they won't question the details. Ethan nodded, but a lingering unease gnawed at him. Despite their meticulous planning, the risk was enormous. If anything went wrong, Daniel's life, and perhaps even his own, could be in real danger. The calm before the storm. As the final pieces of the plan fell into place, Daniel and Ethan shared a quiet moment in the mansion's study. The boy sat cross-legged on the plush carpet, watching as Daniel poured 2 cups of tea. You know, Daniel said, handing a cup to Ethan, when I first saw you running toward my car, I thought you were just another street kid looking for trouble. Ethan looked down, his cheeks flushing slightly. I almost didn't do it. I was scared you wouldn't believe me. Daniel smiled, a rare warmth in his otherwise stern demeanor. "And yet you did. That took more courage than most people will ever know." Ethan sipped his tea, the warmth spreading through him. For the first time in years, he felt like he belonged, like he was part of something bigger than himself. "We're going to win this, aren't we?" Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Daniel's smile faded, replaced by a look of steely determination. "Yes, Ethan. We're going to win. And when this is over, you'll have a home here, if you want it." The boy's eyes widened, but before he could respond, Daniel stood and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Now get some rest. Tomorrow, we face them head-on." As Ethan lay on the guest room bed that night, the events of the past few days swirled in his mind. He had gone from a nameless street kid to the unlikely ally of a millionaire. And though the road ahead was fraught with danger, he felt an unshakable resolve. Together, he and Daniel would see this through to the end. The trap is set. The morning dawned crisp and cold, the kind of day that felt too serene for the chaos it carried beneath the surface. Daniel stood on the balcony of his mansion, overlooking the grounds as if trying to find a shred of peace in the storm brewing around him. But his thoughts were consumed by what lay ahead. The execution of a plan so audacious, it teetered on the edge of brilliance and disaster. Inside, Ethan paced the study, his small frame dwarfed by the towering bookshelves and antique furniture. Though he had spent countless nights on the streets facing danger, this was different. This wasn't just survival. This was a fight for justice. "You're sure this will work?" Ethan asked as Daniel entered the room. Daniel nodded, his confidence steady. People like Rachel and Terry live in a world of greed and arrogance. They believe they're invincible, that they've already won. That's their downfall. They'll never see this coming. Ethan stopped pacing and met Daniel's gaze. "And if they do?" Daniel placed a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder. "Then we adapt. Remember, we hold the truth, and the truth is more powerful than any lie." The accident. By mid-morning, Daniel and Ethan were on the road, heading toward the remote location where the staged accident would take place. The drive was silent except for the hum of the engine. Ethan glanced nervously at Daniel, who remained focused, his hand steady on the wheel. When they reached the secluded stretch of forest, Daniel parked the car and stepped out, motioning for Ethan to follow. The area was eerily quiet, the only sound the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. "This is where it ends," Daniel said, gesturing toward a sharp bend in the road. The spot had been chosen carefully. Its isolation ensured that no one would stumble upon the scene prematurely. Daniel's trusted team was already there, waiting. They had brought a car identical to Daniel's, complete with forged plates and personal items to make the ruse believable. The car had been rigged with a timed explosion that would obliterate it beyond recognition. "Stay here," Daniel instructed Ethan, who nodded and watched from a safe distance. With meticulous precision, the team set up the scene. The duplicate car was positioned to look as though it had skidded off the road and crashed into a tree. Inside, they placed items belonging to Daniel, a watch, fragments of his briefcase, even a burned copy of his driver's license. When the preparations were complete, Daniel approached Ethan. "This is the part where you might want to close your eyes." Ethan shook his head, his determination unyielding. "I want to see it." Daniel gave a small nod of approval before signaling to the team. Within seconds, a deafening explosion shattered the stillness of the forest. Flames engulfed the car, the heat intense even from a distance. Ethan flinched but didn't look away. He watched as the fire consumed the vehicle, leaving behind a smoldering wreck that looked tragically real. "It's done," Daniel said, his voice heavy. "Now, we wait." Rachel's reaction. That evening, Rachel received the news she had been waiting for. A knock at the door interrupted her dinner preparations, and she opened it to find two police officers standing solemnly on the porch. "Mrs. Gray?" one of them asked. "Yes," Rachel replied, feigning concern. We're sorry to inform you that your husband, Daniel Gray, was involved in a fatal car accident earlier today. His vehicle was found on a remote road outside the city. Rachel gasped, her hand flying to her mouth in a dramatic display of shock. No, no, that can't be true, she cried, tears springing to her eyes. The officers exchanged glances, their expressions sympathetic. We understand this is a difficult time, ma'am. If there's anything you need. Rachel nodded, choking back a sob. Thank you. I need a moment. As soon as the officers left, Rachel closed the door and leaned against it, a slow smile spreading across her face. It was done. Daniel was gone, and his fortune was hers, or so she thought. Terry's confidence. Later that night, Rachel met Terry at their usual cafe. The dim lighting and low chatter provided the perfect cover for their conversation. It's over, Rachel said, stirring her coffee with a practiced calm. The police came to the house. They bought it. Terry smirked, leaning back in his chair. I told you it would work. Daniel was too blinded by his own ego to see us coming. Rachel nodded, a satisfied glint in her eyes. The lawyer's office called, too. The will is being finalized tomorrow. By this time next week, everything he built will belong to us. Terry raised his cup in a mock toast. To our new beginning. But neither of them noticed the figure in the corner of the cafe, a hooded boy whose sharp eyes missed nothing. Ethan had been tailing Rachel since the morning, his instincts honed from years on the streets. He watched as the two conspirators reveled in their supposed victory, their arrogance making them careless. The revelation. The next day, Rachel and Terry arrived at the lawyer's office, their confidence unshakable. Rachel wore a black dress and a veil, playing the role of a grieving widow to perfection. Terry, in a dark suit, exuded quiet support. The lawyer greeted them with a solemn nod. Mrs. Gray, Mr. Gray, thank you for coming. I know this is a difficult time. Rachel placed a hand over her heart. Thank you for your understanding. Daniel was everything to me. The lawyer's expression remained neutral as he opened a thick folder. Before we proceed, there's a clause in Mr. Gray's will that I must address. Rachel and Terry exchanged a glance but said nothing. This clause was added shortly before his death. The lawyer continued. It states that, in the event of any suspicious or unnatural circumstances surrounding his passing, the inheritance will be frozen pending a full investigation. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Rachel's composure faltered, and Terry's face darkened. That's absurd, Rachel snapped. Why would he do that? Before the lawyer could respond, the office door swung open. Standing in the doorway was Daniel, alive and well, with Ethan by his side. Rachel and Terry froze, their faces a mix of shock and terror. Because I knew exactly what you were planning, Daniel said, his voice cold as steel. And now so does everyone else. The tables turn. Rachel stumbled back into her chair, her mind racing for an explanation. Daniel, you're alive. I thought. Save it, Daniel interrupted. I know everything. Your late-night meetings, the tampered breaks, the plan to eliminate me and take everything I've worked for. It's over. Terry stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. You have no proof. Daniel raised a hand, silencing him. Actually, I have plenty. Thanks to Ethan here. He gestured to the boy, who stepped forward with a small recorder in his hand. Ethan pressed play, and Rachel and Terry's voices filled the room, their plotting captured in crystal-clear detail. The lawyer's face hardened as he listened, and Rachel's facade crumbled completely. You little rat, Rachel hissed at Ethan, her fury barely contained. Ethan met her glare with unwavering defiance. You tried to kill them. You deserve worse. The lawyer stood, his tone now icy. Mrs. Gray, Mr. Gray, I'll be reporting this to the authorities. I suggest you remain where you are until they arrive. As Rachel and Terry sat in stunned silence, Daniel turned to Ethan, a small smile breaking through his stern expression. You did it, kid. You saved my life. And my future. Ethan smiled back, a warmth blooming in his chest. For the first time in years, he felt truly at home. The fall of greed. The moments following Daniel's dramatic revelation were heavy with tension. Rachel and Terry sat frozen, their faces pale as the weight of their actions came crashing down. Daniel, standing tall and resolute, exuded an air of control they had never seen in him before. Beside him, Ethan stood like a shadow, small in stature, but massive in significance. "You've underestimated me for the last time," Daniel said, his voice steady and commanding. "And you've underestimated the world's ability to see through people like you." Rachel opened her mouth to speak, her well-practiced manipulation rising to the surface. "Daniel, you have to believe me. This is all a misunderstanding. Terry, he's been influencing me, whispering things, but I would never." "Stop," Daniel interrupted sharply, his eyes narrowing. "The only thing worse than your betrayal is the insult of thinking I'd believe another one of your lies." Rachel shrank under his gaze, but Terry, ever the opportunist, saw an opening. "All right, fine," he said, raising his hands as if surrendering. "I messed up. But Rachel, she's innocent in all this. It was my idea, my greed. She wanted to stop me, but I pushed her." Daniel stared at his brother, his expression unreadable. "How noble of you to take the fall now," he said dryly. "Pity it's too late." The sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway as law enforcement arrived. The door opened, and 2 officers entered, their faces as grim as the situation demanded. The lawyer motioned for them to come in, his demeanor professional but stern. "These 2 are suspected of conspiracy to commit murder and fraud. You'll find enough evidence here to begin your investigation." The arrest. Rachel stood abruptly, her carefully crafted facade shattering completely. "This is insane," she screamed, her voice a mix of desperation and fury. "You can't do this to me. I'm his wife." The officers remained impassive as they approached. "Mrs. Gray, Mr. Gray," one of them said, "you're under arrest for conspiracy and attempted murder. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Terry tried to resist, his arrogance bubbling to the surface. "You have nothing on us. This is all hearsay." Daniel stepped forward, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Oh, we have plenty. Surveillance footage, audio recordings, tampered car brakes, all of it. You'll find your denials mean very little when faced with the truth." As the officers cuffed them, Rachel turned to Daniel, her eyes filled with venom. "You'll regret this, Daniel. You think you've won, but you'll see. You'll see." "I already have," Daniel replied coldly. "And you're exactly where you deserve to be." Ethan watched the scene unfold, his emotions a swirl of satisfaction and unease. It was a victory, but one stained with the ugliness of betrayal and greed. A quiet moment of reflection. When the chaos subsided and the room was left empty save for Daniel, Ethan, and the lawyer, a heavy silence fell. The lawyer began gathering his files, his professionalism unwavering despite the drama that had unfolded. "I'll make sure the courts have everything they need," he said. "Justice will take its course." Daniel nodded, his focus shifting to Ethan. The boy stood quietly, his hands in the pockets of his oversized hoodie, his eyes cast downward. "You've been quiet," Daniel said, approaching him. "What's on your mind?" Ethan looked up, his expression thoughtful. "I guess I thought I'd feel happier, but seeing them like that, it's just sad." Daniel crouched slightly, meeting the boy's gaze. "It is sad. Betrayal always is. But it's important to remember, you didn't cause this. They did. Their greed, their choices." Ethan nodded slowly, though the weight of the day still hung heavy on him. An unexpected offer. Later that evening, Daniel and Ethan sat in the mansion's study. The warm glow of the fireplace cast flickering shadows on the walls, and the tension that had gripped them for days began to loosen. "You've done more for me than I could ever repay," Daniel said, breaking the silence. Ethan shrugged, his face reddening slightly. "I just did what was right." Daniel smiled, leaning forward. "What's right isn't always easy, and most people would have walked away. But you didn't, and because of that, I'm alive." Ethan hesitated before responding. I've been alone for so long. No one's ever cared if I was doing the right thing or not." "Well, that changes now," Daniel said firmly. "I've already spoken to someone about setting you up with a proper home and education. But the truth is, you've earned more than just that." Ethan's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" Daniel leaned back, a thoughtful expression on his face. "You're smart, resourceful, and braver than most adults I know. If you're willing, I'd like you to stay here. Not just as someone I'm helping, but as part of my family." Ethan's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. The idea was so foreign, so unimaginable, that he didn't know how to respond. "You don't have to decide right now," Daniel added, "but the offer stands. Always." Ethan nodded slowly, his chest tightening with an unfamiliar mix of emotions: hope, gratitude, and a tentative sense of belonging. The media storm. The next day, news of Rachel and Terry's arrest broke. The headlines were sensational. "Millionaire survives murder plot by wife and brother." The story captivated the city, with every detail dissected by reporters and commentators. But Daniel refused to engage with the media circus. His focus was on rebuilding his life, piece by piece. With Ethan's help, he began going through his personal and business affairs, ensuring no loose ends were left behind. For Ethan, the adjustment was surreal. He went from being invisible on the streets to being thrust into a world of wealth and attention. But through it all, Daniel remained a steady presence, guiding him with patience and understanding. A new beginning. Months passed, and the legal proceedings against Rachel and Terry moved forward. The evidence was overwhelming, and their guilt was undeniable. They were sentenced to lengthy prison terms, their once lofty ambitions reduced to nothing. For Daniel and Ethan, life began to take on a new rhythm. Ethan started school, his natural intelligence shining through in ways no one had ever recognized before. Daniel, meanwhile, found a new purpose in mentoring the boy, teaching him not just about business, but about life, values, and resilience. One evening, as they sat on the mansion's balcony watching the sunset, Ethan turned to Daniel. "Do you think people like Rachel and Terry can ever change?" Daniel thought for a moment before replying. "Maybe, but change only happens when someone wants it. And people like them, they might never see the need." Ethan nodded, absorbing the words. "I'm glad you didn't give up on me." Daniel smiled, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "And I'm glad you didn't give up on me." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold, the two sat in comfortable silence, a bond forged in adversity and strengthened by trust. It wasn't the life either of them had expected, but it was the one they had built together, and it was better than either could have imagined. Restoring trust, building futures. The months following the arrest of Rachel and Terry brought profound changes to both Daniel and Ethan. The mansion, once a symbol of wealth and power, began to feel more like a home, filled with the beginnings of trust and connection. But as the legal battle against Rachel and Terry unfolded, it left scars on Daniel's psyche. Betrayal of that magnitude wasn't easily forgotten. Ethan, too, was navigating unfamiliar territory. For years, he had been invisible, a boy who had learned to survive in the shadows. Now he was at the center of a story that the media couldn't seem to get enough of. Daniel shielded him from the worst of the attention, but Ethan still felt the weight of his newfound notoriety. A visit to the past. One quiet morning, Daniel found Ethan staring out of a window, lost in thought. "Penny for your thoughts?" Daniel asked as he approached. Ethan shrugged, his small frame dwarfed by the oversized armchair he was sitting in. I've been thinking about where I came from. The streets, the people I left behind." Daniel sat across from him, his expression gentle. You've been through more than most people your age should ever have to. But those experiences, they've made you who you are. Ethan hesitated. I feel guilty. I got out, but what about the others? There are so many kids out there, just like me. They don't have a Daniel Gray to help them. Daniel leaned forward, his eyes filled with understanding. Then let's do something about it. Ethan's head snapped up. What do you mean? I mean, you and I both know what it's like to lose faith in people, but we also know how powerful it is when someone gives you a chance, Daniel said. What if we started something? An organization to help kids like you. Shelter, education, support. A place where they can rebuild their lives. Ethan's eyes lit up for the first time in days. You'd really do that? Daniel smiled. We'd do it together. The foundation of hope. Over the next few weeks, Daniel and Ethan worked tirelessly to bring their idea to life. They decided to call the initiative the Beacon Foundation, symbolizing a light of hope for those lost in the darkness. Daniel used his connections to secure funding, while Ethan provided invaluable insights into what the foundation should prioritize. You're the heart of this, Daniel told Ethan one day as they reviewed plans for the first shelter. You know what these kids need because you've lived it. Ethan nodded, his resolve strengthening. I just want to make sure no one else feels as alone as I did. As the foundation began to take shape, Daniel introduced Ethan to his business associates, surprising many with his decision to treat the boy as an equal. But Daniel didn't care about their opinions. Ethan had earned his trust and respect in ways few ever had. Facing the shadows. Amidst the progress, the legal battle against Rachel and Terry loomed. Though they were both securely behind bars, they continued to deny any wrongdoing, each blaming the other for the plot against Daniel. The trial was highly publicized, with reporters eager to paint Rachel as the cunning femme fatale and Terry as the bitter younger sibling. But for Daniel, it was a painful reminder of the betrayal that had almost cost him his life. Ethan, too, struggled with the weight of it all. Though he avoided most of the media coverage, he couldn't escape the whispers of people who recognized him on the streets or at school. That's the kid who saved the millionaire, they'd say, sometimes with awe, other times with skepticism. One day, after a particularly difficult encounter with some classmates, Ethan returned to the mansion, his shoulders slumped. Daniel found him in the study, staring at the fireplace. You okay? Daniel asked, sitting beside him. Ethan shook his head. Sometimes I feel like I'll never just be normal. Everyone either looks at me like I'm a hero or like I don't belong. Daniel sighed. I know that feeling. After what Rachel and Terry did, I felt like I couldn't trust anyone. Like every look or word had a hidden meaning. But you can't let other people define you, Ethan. You've already proven who you are. Ethan looked up at Daniel, his expression softening. Thanks. I guess it just takes time, huh? It does, Daniel agreed. But you're not alone in this. Remember that. A turning point. As the trial neared its conclusion, Rachel made a surprising move. Through her lawyer, she requested a meeting with Daniel. At first, Daniel was reluctant. What could she possibly say that would make any difference? But Ethan encouraged him to hear her out. Sometimes people need to face the person they hurt, Ethan said, even if it's just for closure. Reluctantly, Daniel agreed. The meeting was arranged at the prison where Rachel was being held, with strict security measures in place. Daniel walked into the sterile visiting room, his emotions a mix of anger and curiosity. Rachel sat on the other side of the table, looking pale and gaunt. Daniel, she said, her voice trembling. Thank you for coming. Get to the point, Rachel, Daniel replied coldly. Tears welled in her eyes, but Daniel couldn't tell if they were genuine or another performance. I don't expect you to forgive me. I want you to know, it wasn't all fake. The love I felt for you, at least in the beginning, it was real. Daniel remained silent, his face unreadable. I was weak, Rachel continued. I let greed consume me, and I let Terry manipulate me. But I take responsibility for my actions. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make amends, even if it's too late for you to believe me." For a moment, Daniel considered her words. Then he stood, his voice firm. "You're right. It's too late. I don't hate you, Rachel, but I'll never trust you again. Whatever redemption you're seeking, you'll have to find it without me." As he left the room, he felt a strange sense of relief, not forgiveness, but a release from the anger that had gripped him for so long. A new chapter. The day the Beacon Foundation officially opened its doors was a moment of triumph for both Daniel and Ethan. The first shelter, located in the heart of the city, was a sprawling facility equipped with dormitories, classrooms, and recreational areas. It was a place of hope, built from the ashes of betrayal. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, Daniel gave a short speech, acknowledging Ethan's role in the Foundation's creation. "This young man," he said, gesturing to Ethan, "taught me the true meaning of courage and resilience. This foundation exists because of him." Ethan blushed as the crowd erupted in applause, but there was a small, proud smile on his face. For the first time, he felt like he truly belonged, not just in Daniel's life, but in the world. A quiet evening. That night, back at the mansion, Daniel and Ethan sat on the balcony, looking out over the city. The lights twinkled like stars, and for the first time in a long time, both felt a sense of peace. "You did good today," Daniel said, breaking the silence. "So did you," Ethan replied, grinning. Daniel chuckled, raising a glass of water in a toast. "To new beginnings." Ethan clinked his glass against Daniel's. "To family." As they sat under the stars, the past no longer felt like a weight dragging them down. Instead, it was a foundation, a reminder of how far they had come and how much further they could go together. A legacy forged in adversity. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across Daniel's estate. Life had settled into a rhythm, but the echoes of past betrayals still lingered in quiet moments. While Rachel and Terry served their sentences, Daniel and Ethan continued to build a future defined not by wealth but by purpose. Yet with each passing day, they both realized that the work they had started was far from over. The ripple effect. The Beacon Foundation quickly became a beacon in more than just name. Within months, the shelter was filled with children and teenagers, each carrying their own stories of hardship and resilience. The Foundation's success attracted attention, with donations pouring in and volunteers lining up to contribute. Yet, amidst the growth, Ethan noticed something unsettling. Many of the children struggled to trust the system that had often failed them. One afternoon, Ethan visited the shelter and found a boy sitting alone in the corner of the common room. The boy, no older than 8, clutched a threadbare teddy bear and stared at the floor. "Hey," Ethan said softly, crouching to meet the boy's eye level. "What's your name?" The boy glanced at him but said nothing. His eyes were guarded, a look Ethan recognized all too well. "You don't have to talk if you don't want to," Ethan continued, "but I'll be here if you need me." As Ethan stood to leave, the boy whispered, "Logan." Ethan turned back, smiling gently. "It's nice to meet you, Logan." Over time, Ethan made it a point to connect with kids like Logan, sharing pieces of his own story to show them they weren't alone. His efforts didn't go unnoticed. One evening, as he recounted his day to Daniel, the older man smiled with pride. "You've become more than just a part of this foundation," Daniel said. "You're its heart." Ethan shrugged, a hint of embarrassment creeping into his expression. "I'm just trying to help." "And you're doing more than you know," Daniel replied. "Don't ever underestimate the impact you have." The return of shadows. Just as life seemed to be stabilizing, an unexpected visitor arrived at the mansion. Daniel was in his study when his housekeeper informed him of a man at the gate, requesting an audience. It was Terry. Against his better judgment, Daniel agreed to see him. When Terry entered, he looked disheveled, his once cocky demeanor replaced by desperation. "What do you want?" Daniel asked coldly, remaining behind his desk. Terry hesitated, his hands wringing nervously. I need help. Daniel's eyes narrowed. Help? After everything you've done? I know I don't deserve it, Terry said quickly. But I've lost everything, Daniel. Rachel, she's turned on me. She's trying to pin the entire plot on me to reduce her sentence. Daniel felt a flicker of pity, but it was quickly overshadowed by anger. And why should I care? You are more than willing to see me dead. Terry's shoulders sagged. I made mistakes. I let my greed control me, but I swear I've changed. Being in prison, it's given me time to think. Daniel leaned back in his chair, studying his brother. You expect me to believe that a few months behind bars made you a better man? Terry looked up, his eyes pleading. I just want a chance, Daniel. Please. After a long silence, Daniel sighed. I'll help you on one condition. You turn over every piece of evidence you have against Rachel. No more lies, no more games. You tell the truth, the whole truth. Terry nodded eagerly. Anything. I'll do it. Confronting the past. Daniel's decision to help Terry brought a storm of emotions to the surface. Ethan, who had overheard parts of the conversation, was livid. Why would you help him? Ethan demanded. He tried to kill you. Daniel placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. Because sometimes, helping someone isn't about them. It's about you. I need to know I did the right thing, even if he doesn't deserve it. Ethan's anger softened, though he still struggled to understand. I don't think I could ever forgive someone like that. And that's okay, Daniel said gently. Forgiveness isn't always about the other person. It's about letting go of the power they hold over you. A victory for justice. With Terry's cooperation, the case against Rachel reached its conclusion. The court found her guilty of masterminding the plot and sentenced her to life in prison. Terry received a reduced sentence, but was required to serve additional time for his role in the conspiracy. When the verdict was announced, Daniel felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. Justice had been served, but the cost had been immense. Still, he refused to let the past define his future. The celebration of life. To mark the one-year anniversary of the Beacon Foundation's opening, Daniel and Ethan organized a gala, inviting donors, volunteers, and the children whose lives had been transformed by the initiative. The event was held at the mansion, its grand halls filled with laughter and music. As the night progressed, Daniel took to the stage to address the crowd. This foundation is more than just a shelter, he said. It's a testament to what we can achieve when we refuse to give up on each other. And none of this would have been possible without someone who reminded me of the importance of courage and compassion. He gestured for Ethan to join him, and the boy reluctantly stepped onto the stage, his cheeks flushing as the crowd applauded. This young man, Daniel continued, is the reason I'm here today. He's the reason this foundation exists, and he's proof that no matter how dark things may seem, there's always hope. Ethan's voice shook slightly as he spoke into the microphone. I used to think no one cared about kids like me. But Daniel showed me that one person can make a difference. Now, I want to be that person for others. The applause that followed was thunderous, and Ethan's heart swelled with a sense of belonging he had never known. A new legacy. As the gala wound down and the guests departed, Daniel and Ethan sat on the balcony, the city lights twinkling below them. The weight of the past year felt lighter now, replaced by a sense of accomplishment and hope. You've come a long way, Daniel said, his voice filled with pride. So have you, Ethan replied, grinning. Daniel chuckled. You know, when I first met you, I thought you were just a scrappy kid trying to make trouble. Now, I see you for what you really are, a leader. Ethan looked down, a small smile playing on his lips. I couldn't have done it without you. And I wouldn't be here without you, Daniel said. We're a team, Ethan. Always. As they sat in comfortable silence, both knew that their journey was far from over. But they also knew that, together, they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. The foundation they had built, both literally and figuratively, was strong, and it would stand as a testament to the power of trust, resilience, and redemption for years to come.